The emergency oxygen masks dangled like broken promises above seat 14A as Flight 847 shuddered through turbulence 37,000 feet over the Colorado Rockies. Sarah Chen gripped her armrest, knuckles white against the worn leather, watching. The flight attendant's practiced smiles falter as the aircraft lurched violently to starboard. Through the small oval window, storm clouds rolled like ancient titans across the mountain peaks, their edges crackling with electricity that seemed to reach for the aluminum skin of the Boeing 737. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison," the intercom crackled with static. "We're experiencing some severe weather ahead. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The woman in 1-4 closed her eyes, not from fear of the storm, but from the weight of memories that turbulence always awakened. Her weathered hands, marked with scars from ejection seat training and years of gripping control sticks, at impossible G-forces, rested motionless on her lap. At 62, Dr. Sarah Chen had traded her flight suit for civilian clothes, her call sign Phoenix for a simple boarding pass, and her F-16 Fighting Falcon for whatever commercial aircraft would carry her to the next aerospace consulting job. Storms remembered her, even when the world had forgotten. "Ma'am, you okay over there?" The voice belonged to Marcus Williams, a young aerospace engineer in 14B, his laptop displaying complex aerodynamic calculations that Sarah recognized from her own years, designing flight systems at Edwards Air Force Base. His kind eyes reflected genuine concern, the same expression she'd seen countless times in young pilots under her command. "Just thinking," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the measured calm that had once guided squadrons through hostile airspace. She noticed his screen stress analysis models for next-generation fighter jets. "Interesting work you have there." Marcus brightened, closing his laptop slightly but keeping it visible. "Oh, this? I'm working on control surface optimization for the new F-35 variants. Pretty standard stuff, really. I mean, compared to what the real pioneers did back in the day." He gestured toward the window where lightning illuminated the clouds. "My grandfather always told me about the test pilots who flew in weather like this with no computers, no GPS, just skill and instinct." Sarah smiled, an expression both warm and distant. "Your grandfather sounds like he knew what he was talking about." He was Air Force, actually. Mechanic on F-4 Phantoms during Vietnam. Said the pilots were either crazy brave or crazy stupid, couldn't tell which. Marcus laughed, then grew more serious. "He passed last year. Left me his old technical manuals and some photos. One day, I hope to meet someone who flew those birds, you know. Hear the real stories." The aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time, and several passengers gasped audibly. Sarah's trained eye caught the subtle signs, the way Captain Morrison's voice had tightened, how the senior flight attendant, Janet Rodriguez, kept glancing toward the cockpit with barely concealed worry. 34 years of military aviation had taught Sarah to read the spaces between words, the pauses that carried more weight than entire briefings. "Folks, we're going to need to make an unscheduled landing," Captain Morrison announced, his professional composure intact, but strain evident to those who knew how to listen. "Denver International is reporting severe storms, so we're diverting to Colorado Springs Municipal Airport. Air traffic control is directing us to hold at 15,000 feet until conditions improve." Sarah's pulse quickened, not from anxiety but from recognition. Colorado Springs, the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain, home to NORAD, where she'd spent 3 years as a liaison officer integrating fighter response protocols with aerospace defense systems. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was returning. As a passenger to airspace she'd once protected as a guardian. Through the window, she could make out the familiar geography below. The Arkansas River wound through the valley like a silver thread, And despite the storm clouds, she recognized the distinct outline of Peterson Air Force Base in the distance. Somewhere down there, young pilots were probably grounded by weather. Frustrated and eager, the same way she'd been decades ago when storms kept the squadron earthbound. "Excuse me," came a voice from across the aisle. Sarah turned to see an elderly man in 13C, his VFW cap tilted at a jaunty angle, medals visible on his jacket lapel. "Couldn't help but overhear you folks talking about the Air Force. Name's Walter. Thompson. Flew B-52s back in the Cold War days." His weathered face creased into a knowing smile. "Something about this storm reminds me of a mission over the Arctic Circle in '78. Weather so bad. We couldn't see our own wingtips, but we had a job to do." Sarah nodded respectfully. "Those were different times, sir. Different kinds of courage required." "Different, maybe, but courage is courage," Walter replied. "And from the way you're watching this storm, I'd say you've seen your share of bad weather from the pilot's seat." Before Sarah could respond, the aircraft dropped suddenly, caught in a powerful downdraft. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the cabin in an eerie amber glow. Janet Rodriguez moved swiftly down the aisle, her professional demeanor masking what Sarah recognized as controlled urgency. As she passed row 14, she paused briefly, her hand resting on Sarah's seatback. "Doctor." "Chen," Janet's voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw your name on the passenger manifest. I wanted to say, my brother served under Colonel Chen at Nellis. He always said you were the finest pilot he ever knew." Sarah's breath caught. Colonel Chen, a rank and identity she'd worked decades to leave behind, yet it followed her like a contrail across clear skies. She looked up at Janet, seeing past the flight attendant uniform to recognize the military bearing beneath, the way she stood at attention even while leaning down. "Your brother is Captain Diego Rodriguez. He flew with the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron from 2009 to 2015. Said you taught him that being a good pilot wasn't just about flying the aircraft. It was about understanding why you were flying it." The name hit Sarah like a punch to the solar plexus. Diego Rodriguez, rocket to his squadron mates, one of her brightest protégés, a natural pilot with an engineer's mind and a philosopher's heart. She'd written his recommendation for test pilot school, attended his wedding, mourned with his family when an experimental aircraft took his life over the Nevada desert 5 years ago. "Diego," Sarah whispered, the name carrying the weight of memory and loss. He was exceptional." Janet's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He used to call you Phoenix. Said you could rise from any situation, no matter how impossible." When his plane ... double quotes, she paused, collecting herself. When it happened, he was testing new fly-by-wire systems. The investigation showed he stayed with the aircraft longer than he should have, tried to save the data instead of ejecting early. They said he learned that kind of dedication from you. The storm outside seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was responding to the emotional turbulence within the cabin. Lightning struck close enough that the electromagnetic pulse briefly interfered with the aircraft systems, causing lights to flicker and the intercom to emit a sharp burst of static. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received clearance to begin our approach to Colorado Springs," Captain Morrison announced. "However, I need everyone to understand that we're landing in challenging conditions. The airport has emergency crews standing by as a precautionary measure." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Somewhere below, air traffic controllers were orchestrating a complex ballet of aircraft, weather, and safety protocols. She could visualize the radar screens, the green dots representing lives in motion, the careful calculations of wind speed, visibility, and runway conditions. Marcus noticed her stillness and mistook it for fear. "Hey, don't worry," he said softly. "These commercial pilots train for this stuff all the time. We'll be fine." But Sarah wasn't worried about the landing. She was remembering another storm. Another emergency 23 years ago over the skies of Bosnia when her F-16 took ground fire and she had to nurse a damaged aircraft through weather far worse than this. The call sign Phoenix hadn't been assigned to her. She'd earned it that day, rising from the ashes of a seemingly impossible situation to bring her wounded bird home. Walter Thompson leaned forward from across the aisle. "Miss, I've been watching you since we hit turbulence. You're not just any passenger, are you?" Sarah met his eyes, seeing the recognition there. Military personnel had a way of finding each other, even decades after service, even in civilian clothes on commercial aircraft. "I used to fly," she admitted. "What did you fly?" Walter's question carried the weight of mutual respect. F-16s mostly. Some test work on experimental platforms. Marcus's laptop nearly slid off his tray table as he turned to stare at her. "You're a fighter pilot? Like a real fighter pilot?" "Was," Sarah corrected gently. "Long time ago." "But Walter..." Thompson was studying her face with the intensity of someone placing a half-remembered photograph. His eyes widened slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of awe that made other passengers glance over. "Phoenix," he whispered. "You're Phoenix." The word hung in the cabin air like a prayer, like a secret suddenly revealed. Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense, the way they had decades ago when surface-to-air radar locked onto her aircraft. Being recognized was always a double-edged sword. It brought respect, but also expectations, responsibility she'd thought she'd left behind with her retirement. "I don't go by that anymore," she said quietly, but Walter was shaking his head, a slow smile spreading across his weathered features. "Ma'am, with all due respect, some names you don't get to retire. Phoenix isn't just what they called you. It's who you are." The aircraft shuddered again as it began its descent, and through the window, Sarah could see the lights of Colorado Springs emerging through the storm clouds like stars, being born from chaos. Somewhere down there, in the control towers and ready rooms, in the hangars where the next generation of aircraft waited for dawn, the legacy she'd helped build continued without her. But as Flight 847 dropped through the turbulent sky toward an uncertain landing, Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the familiar thrill of being exactly where she needed to be. When others needed her most, the storm was far from over. And Phoenix was still flying. The descent through storm clouds felt like traveling backward through time for Sarah Chen. Each bump and roll of the aircraft triggered memories she'd carefully cataloged and stored in the deepest chambers of her mind. The way her F-16 had bucked against hurricane-force winds over the Persian Gulf. The sick feeling in her stomach when hydraulic failure warning lights turned her cockpit into a Christmas tree of amber and red. The weight of responsibility when she'd led squadrons through weather that grounded lesser pilots. She pressed her palm against the cool window, watching lightning fork across the darkness below. At 62, her hands still bore the calluses from thousands of hours gripping control sticks, still carried the subtle tremor that came from decades of high-G maneuvers that had compressed her spine and taught her body to function under forces that would render normal people unconscious. The doctors had told her that the tremor would worsen with age, a reminder, they said, of the price her body had paid for a life lived at the edge of human capability. "Tell me about the F-16, Marcus said, his engineering textbooks forgotten in his lap. "What was it really like?" Sarah smiled, remembering her first solo flight in the Fighting Falcon at Luke Air Force Base in 1984. She'd been 23 years old, one of only a dozen women in her training class, carrying the weight of proving that she belonged in a cockpit that had been designed around male physiology and male assumptions about courage, skill, and dedication. "It was like being strapped to a controlled explosion," she said, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone who'd told this story in classified briefings and at air shows to curious reporters and wide-eyed children. 16,000 pounds. of thrust behind you, computer systems that could process information faster than human reflexes, weapon systems that could engage targets beyond visual range. But at the end of the day, it was still about a human being making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She paused, watching the storm clouds part briefly to reveal the glittering lights of Colorado Springs below. The city had grown since her last visit, suburban sprawl reaching toward the foothills, new developments clustered around the military installations that formed the economic backbone of the region. But the mountains remained unchanged, ancient. Granite sentinels that had witnessed countless aircraft pass overhead, some carrying heroes home, others becoming memorials in the high country, where wreckage lay scattered like metal prayers among the pine trees. "The thing nobody tells you about being a fighter pilot," Sarah continued, "is how much of it happens between your ears. The aircraft is just a tool, sophisticated, powerful, but ultimately dependent on the human operating it. You're processing information from dozens of sources simultaneously: radar, radio communications, visual references, engine parameters, weapon status, navigation data, threat warnings. Your brain learns to prioritize and filter, to make sense of chaos moving. At 600 miles per hour, Walter Thompson leaned forward from across the aisle, his VFW cap slightly askew. "But it's more than that, isn't it? The responsibility." Sarah nodded, recognizing the understanding in his eyes. "Every time you strap into that cockpit, you're carrying more than just yourself. You're carrying the mission, your squadron, the trust that your country has placed in you, the taxpayers who funded your training, the ground crews who prepped your aircraft." She gestured toward the window. "And sometimes you're carrying the knowledge that people on the ground, people who will never know your name, are depending on you to succeed." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Is that why they called you Phoenix?" The question hung in the cabin air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Sarah had been asked this countless times over the years, by reporters, by fellow pilots, by her own students when she'd transitioned from operational flying to instruction and testing. The truth was more complex than the mythology that had grown around her call sign, more human than the legend suggested. "It started as a joke, actually," she said, surprised by her own willingness to share. "My first squadron commander at Holloman Air Force Base was Colonel Jack Peterson, Thunderbolt, to everyone who knew him. He had this theory that the best pilots were the ones who could survive their own mistakes, learn from them, and come back stronger." She could still picture Peterson's weathered face, his salt and pepper mustache, the way he'd lean back in his office chair and study young pilots with the intensity of someone calculating odds. He'd been shot down twice over Vietnam, spent 14 months as a prisoner of war, and returned to flying with a dedication that bordered on obsession. "I had this habit of pushing aircraft to their limits during training," Sarah continued. "Engine failures, hydraulic problems, electrical malfunctions. If something could go wrong with an F-16, it seemed to happen to me. But I always brought the aircraft back. Peterson used to say I had 9 lives, that I could rise from the ashes of any situation." She remembered the day the call sign became official. She'd been flying a training mission over the White Sands, missile range, when her F-16 suffered a catastrophic engine failure at 30,000 feet. Standard procedure called for immediate ejection, but Sarah had noticed that debris from her aircraft was falling toward a small town below. She'd stayed with the damaged fighter for an extra 90 seconds, steering it away from populated areas before finally punching out at dangerously low altitude. The aircraft had crashed in empty desert, creating a crater that filled with rainwater and became a temporary lake. Peterson had visited her in the hospital while she recovered from compression fractures in her spine, injuries sustained during the high-speed ejection. He'd brought a bottle of champagne and a new name tag embroidered with Phoenix. "From the ashes," he'd said, raising his plastic hospital cup in a toast. That's who you are, Chen. That's who you'll always be. The storm outside seemed to be intensifying as Flight 847 continued its descent. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom again, more tension evident in his measured delivery. Folks were about 5 minutes out from Colorado Springs. Tower is reporting wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour with variable direction, so we're going to have a bit of a bumpy landing. Flight attendants, please check that all passengers are securely fastened and prepare for landing. Sarah felt her body automatically responding to the announcement. Shoulders back, feet flat on the floor, hands positioned to brace against sudden deceleration. 34 years of aviation had programmed these responses so deeply that they occurred without conscious thought, muscle memory from thousands of carrier landings, combat approaches, and emergency situations, where proper positioning could mean the difference between walking away and being carried away. Janet Rodriguez appeared beside row 14, her professional smile masking what Sarah recognized as pre-landing anxiety. Dr. Chen, the captain asked me to let you know that he's aware of your background. He wanted to extend the invitation for you to visit the cockpit after landing, if you're interested. Sarah raised an eyebrow. He knows? Word travels fast in aviation circles, ma'am. Captain Morrison flew F-15s before joining the airlines. He said he'd heard Phoenix stories at every pilot bar from Ramstein to Okinawa. The aircraft lurched suddenly as it had encountered wind shear, and Sarah's trained senses immediately processed the information. Crosswind from the southwest, gusting and variable, probably associated with the leading edge of the storm system. She could visualize Captain Morrison and his first officer in the cockpit, hands moving across instruments and controls with practiced efficiency, executing the complex dance of energy management, attitude control, and situational awareness that define professional aviation. Marcus gripped his armrests as the aircraft rolled slightly, fighting the turbulence. This is normal, right? This level of movement? Within parameters, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once steadied young pilots during their first combat missions. The pilots are just earning their pay tonight. But even as she spoke, Sarah was analyzing the sounds and sensations of the aircraft, comparing them to her vast database of aviation experience. The engine note was steady, the control inputs smooth and deliberate. The crew was managing the situation professionally, but she could feel the challenge in the way the aircraft responded to the wind, the subtle hesitation in its movement that suggested they were operating at the margins of comfortable flight conditions. Walter Thompson caught her eye. Been in worse, I'm guessing. Sarah nodded, her mind drifting to a night over the Adriatic Sea in 1995, when she'd led a two-ship formation through a thunderstorm that generated turbulence violent enough to crack the canopy of her wingman's F-16. They'd been returning from a combat air patrol over Bosnia, low on fuel and facing weather that would have grounded commercial aviation for days. Different aircraft, different mission, she said. But weather is weather. The key is respecting it without being paralyzed by it. She thought about the young pilots who had served under her command over the years, men and women who had trusted her judgment, followed her lead, learned from her example. Some had gone on to distinguished careers of their own, rising through the ranks to become squadron commanders, test pilots, and aerospace executives. Others had left military service to pursue civilian careers, taking with them the lessons about discipline, precision, and courage under pressure that military aviation demanded. But some hadn't made it home at all. Diego Rodriguez had been one of her finest students, a natural pilot with the intellectual curiosity that made him perfect for test work. She'd recommended him for the test pilot school at Edwards, watched him graduate at the top of his class, celebrated when he was selected for the F-35 Lightning II program. His death 5 years ago in an experimental aircraft accident had hit her harder than she'd expected, a reminder that the profession She devoted her life to still demanded the ultimate sacrifice from those who pushed the boundaries of flight. Aircraft's landing gear extended with a mechanical thunk that resonated through the cabin, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Through the window, she could see the runway lights of Colorado Springs Municipal Airport emerging through the storm, parallel lines of white and amber marking the narrow strip of concrete that would soon receive 43 tons of aircraft, and 73 souls seeking safe harbor from the tempest. "There," she said to Marcus, pointing out the window. "See those lights? That's home." But as Flight 847 lined up for its final approach, buffeted by winds that tested both aircraft and crew, Sarah Chen, callsign Phoenix, felt something stirring within her that she hadn't experienced since her retirement. The old instincts were awakening, the hypervigilance that had kept her alive through decades of dangerous flying, the sense of responsibility that extended beyond her own safety to encompass everyone sharing this aluminum tube suspended between earth and sky. The storm was trying to tell her something, she realized. After all these years of consulting work, of civilian life, of trying to be just another passenger, the universe had placed her exactly where she needed to be. In seat 14A, surrounded by people who were beginning to understand that they were in the presence of something rare, a guardian who had spent her life protecting others. Whether they knew it or not, Phoenix was about to rise again. The runway lights of Colorado Springs Municipal Airport appeared and disappeared through sheets of rain as Flight 847 fought its way through the final approach. Sarah could feel the aircraft struggle against the crosswinds, the subtle corrections in pitch and roll that spoke of pilots earning every foot of altitude, every degree of heading correction. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison and his first officer were conducting a symphony of aviation, their hands moving across controls with the precision of surgeons and the urgency of combat pilots. Through her window, Sarah caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch in her throat. Barely visible through the storm, she could make out the distinctive silhouettes of military aircraft on the far side of the field, angular shapes that her trained eye immediately recognized as F-22 Raptors, fifth-generation fighters, the most advanced air superiority aircraft ever built, sitting like sleeping predators in the rain. "What are F-22s doing at a municipal airport?" Marcus asked, having noticed her sudden attention to the distant aircraft. Before Sarah could respond, Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom with barely controlled urgency. "Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately. We're executing a go-around. Repeat, we are going around for another approach." The aircraft's engines roared to full power, pressing everyone back into their seats as the Boeing 737 clawed for altitude. Through the window, Sarah watched the runway lights fall away into the darkness, replaced by the chaotic dance of lightning across the Colorado landscape. A go-around during severe weather meant one of two things. Either the approach had become unstable, or something on the ground had made landing inadvisable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Morrison continued, his professional composure intact despite the stress evident in his voice, "we've been advised by air traffic control that the airport is temporarily closed due to emergency aircraft operations on the field. We're going to hold at 8,000 feet until we receive clearance to attempt another approach. Emergency aircraft operations." Sarah's military-trained mind immediately began processing possibilities. The F-22s she'd spotted weren't there. For a routine training exercise, fifth-generation fighters didn't deploy to civilian airports unless something significant was happening. Her phone, despite being in airplane mode, began receiving emergency alerts through the aircraft's Wi-Fi system. NORAD tracking unidentified. Aircraft over Colorado airspace. Civilian flights diverted. Military response authorized. The pieces began falling into place like a tactical puzzle Sarah had solved countless times during her active duty years. Somewhere above them, beyond the storm clouds and commercial aviation corridors, unknown aircraft were operating in restricted airspace. The kind of situation that triggered automatic military response protocols and sent F-22 Raptors scrambling from their bases to investigate potential threats. Walter Thompson was reading the same emergency alerts on his phone, his weathered face growing grim. "Haven't seen this kind of activity since 9/11s, he said quietly. "Unknown aircraft over NORAD. Territory? That's not something they take lightly." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Cheyenne Mountain, home to NORAD and the Aerospace Defense Command, lay just 40 miles south of their current position. Any unidentified aircraft in this region would be treated as a potential threat to national security infrastructure. The F-22s would be vectored to intercept, identify, and if necessary, engage any aircraft that couldn't be positively identified through normal channels. Janet Rodriguez moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, but Sarah could see the tension in her movements. As she passed row 14, she leaned down slightly. "Dr. Chen, the captain asked me to inform you that we may be here for a while. Air traffic control is reporting multiple unknown contacts on radar, and military aircraft are responding." "How many?" "Unknowns?" Sarah asked, her voice automatically dropping to the quiet intensity she'd used during classified briefings. "At least 3, possibly more. They appeared suddenly about 20 minutes ago. No transponder codes, no flight plans filed. Flying in formation above 35,000 feet. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Unknown aircraft information suggested either a coordinated training exercise gone wrong or something far more serious. During her years with NORAD liaison duties, she'd participated in dozens of exercises designed to test response times and identification procedures. But this felt different, the urgency in the captain's voice, the immediate civilian traffic diversion, the deployment of F-22s to a municipal airport through the cabin windows. Passengers were beginning to notice unusual activity in the sky. Around them, lightning illuminated what appeared to be contrails, the telltale signatures of high-performance aircraft operating at altitudes where water vapor condensed into visible streams. But these contrails were moving in patterns that defied normal commercial aviation routes, sharp turns and climbs that spoke of military maneuvering. "There." Marcus pointed toward his window. "Did you see that? Something just went by us really fast, above and to the right." Sarah pressed her face to the window, her trained eyes scanning the storm-lit sky. For a brief moment, she caught sight of what Marcus had seen, a dark shape moving at tremendous speed through the clouds, its navigation lights strobing in patterns she didn't recognize. Not American military aircraft, she knew. Every light configuration used by U.S. forces. The unknown contact was operating with different protocols. Different equipment. Her phone buzzed with another emergency alert. Multiple aircraft operating without authorization in restricted airspace. NORAD defensive measures activated. Avoid Denver metro area. "This is really happening," Walter said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had lived through the Cold War, who understood the implications of unknown military aircraft operating over American territory. Question is, who are they and what do they want? Sarah's mind was already 3 steps ahead, analyzing the tactical situation with the reflexes of someone who had spent decades thinking in terms of air defense and threat assessment. Unknown aircraft in formation, operating above commercial aviation altitudes, with the technological capability to appear suddenly on radar. This suggested advanced military hardware, possibly stealth technology. Definitely not civilian aircraft that had simply lost communication. Captain Morrison's voice returned to the intercom, and this time Sarah could hear the strain beneath his professional delivery. "Folks, I need to share some additional information with you. We've been contacted directly by NORAD Operations Center. They've requested that any former military personnel on board identify themselves to the flight crew for possible consultation. The cabin fell silent except for the drone of engines and the drumming of rain against aluminum skin. Sarah felt every eye in her vicinity turned toward her, recognition dawning among passengers who had been listening to her conversation with Marcus and Walter. The weight of expectation, of responsibility, settled on her shoulders like the familiar pressure of a flight suit. Janet Rodriguez appeared beside row 14 with tablet in hand, her military bearing now evident despite the airline uniform. "Dr. Chen, the captain needs to speak with you. He's been briefed on your background and clearance level." Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Janet toward the cockpit, aware that she was crossing a threshold from civilian passenger to military asset. The cockpit door opened to reveal Captain Morrison and First Officer Amanda Price hunched over radio equipment, their faces illuminated by the green glow of radar displays. "Phoenix," Captain Morrison said, using her call sign without preamble. "I flew F-15s out of Langley, from 92 to 98. Heard your name in every briefing room from here to Kadena." Sarah nodded, automatically shifting into the clipped, efficient communication style of military aviation. "What's the situation, Captain?" Morrison gestured toward the radar display. 7 minutes ago, NORAD started tracking 3 unknown aircraft, operating in formation above 35,000 feet. No transponder codes, no radio contact, sophisticated jamming capability that's interfering with ground-based radar. They appeared out of nowhere, and they're maneuvering in ways that suggest advanced flight capabilities. He pointed to a cluster of green dots on the radar screen. F-22s out of Peterson are airborne, vectoring to intercept. But here's the problem. The unknowns are operating in the same airspace where we have multiple civilian flights holding. Due to weather, the situation is about to become very complicated. Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating intercept vectors, fuel states, and rules of engagement. The unknown aircraft were positioned in a triangular formation, moving slowly but with purpose toward the Colorado Springs area. The F-22s were approaching from multiple vectors, following standard intercept procedures that would allow them to identify and, if necessary, engage the intruders. "Have the unknowns responded to any radio challenges?" she asked. "Negative," First Officer Price replied. "Complete radio silence, but they're definitely maneuvering in response to the F-22s, whatever they are. They know they're being intercepted." Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see lightning illuminating the upper atmosphere where the drama was unfolding. Somewhere above them, beyond the storm clouds and civilian aircraft, American fighter pilots were closing with unknown aircraft in a confrontation that could escalate from identification to engagement in a matter of minutes. Her radio training kicked in automatically as she reached for the communications panel. "Captain, I need to talk to the NORAD Operations Center. My clearance codes should still be active." Morrison nodded, switching radio frequencies to the military emergency channel. "NORAD Operations. This is American Airlines 847. We have a former Air Force colonel on board. Call sign Phoenix, requesting direct communication." The response came immediately, cutting through static with the urgency of a developing crisis. "Phoenix, this is NORAD Operations Center, Colonel Sarah Chen. Is that correct?" "Affirmative. NORAD Operations." "Phoenix on American 847, requesting tactical briefing." "Phoenix, we have an unprecedented situation. 3 unknown aircraft, advanced capabilities, operating in restricted airspace over Colorado. F-22s are in intercept position, but the unknowns are not responding to standard identification procedures. We need someone with your experience to advise on potential escalation protocols." Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with high-stakes aviation, the heightened awareness that had kept her alive through decades of dangerous flying. But this was different from anything she'd experienced. She was no longer in a fighter cockpit with control over her own destiny, but suspended in a commercial aircraft with 73 souls depending on decisions being made by pilots she couldn't see, facing opponents she couldn't identify. NORAD Operations Phoenix. What are the flight characteristics of the unknowns? Any visual identification from the interceptors? Negative visual ID. The unknowns are maintaining position just inside cloud cover, but they're demonstrating flight. Characteristics that exceed known civilian aircraft capabilities. Rapid altitude changes, sharp turns at high speed, formation flying that suggests advanced pilot training. Through the radio static, Sarah could hear the controlled urgency of the NORAD Operations Center, voices calling out radar contacts, updating intercept vectors, coordinating with multiple military installations across the region. The machinery of American air defense was responding to a threat unlike anything they'd encountered since the end of the Cold War, and she was trapped at 8,000 feet, a passenger in the middle of a confrontation that could change everything. The radio crackled with urgency as NORAD Operations Center connected Phoenix directly to the lead F-22 pilot. Sarah pressed the headset closer to her ear, filtering out the ambient noise of Flight 847's engines and the storm drumming against the cockpit windows. Phoenix, this is Viper 1-1, Major Lisa Park, commanding F-22 Flight of 4. NORAD says you're the expert on intercept protocols. We need guidance on these unknowns. They're not responding to anything in the playbook. Sarah's heart stopped for a moment. Major Lisa Park. She knew that name. 8 years ago, Sarah had been the reviewing officer for Park's application to the F-22 program, one of the youngest pilots ever selected for the Raptor. A prodigy with reflexes that tested in the top 1% of military aviators and a tactical mind that had impressed even the most skeptical instructors. Viper 1-1 Phoenix. I remember you, Major Park. Your instructor at Nellis said you could fly a brick if it had wings and engines. Even through the radio static, Sarah could hear the smile in Park's voice. Phoenix, it's an honor to work with you, ma'am. But we have a situation here that's beyond normal parameters. These unknowns are flying in formation at Angels 37, maintaining perfect spacing while maneuvering through weather that should make formation flying impossible. Sarah glanced at the radar display in the commercial aircraft's cockpit, seeing the green dots that represented both friendly and unknown aircraft. The tactical picture was developing rapidly, F-22s approaching from multiple vectors, unknown aircraft maintaining their triangular formation while demonstrating flight capabilities that shouldn't be possible in severe weather conditions. Viper 1-1. Describe the flight characteristics you're observing. Phoenix, these aircraft are changing altitude by thousands of feet in seconds without apparent energy loss. Sharp turns at high speed with no visible control surfaces. And ma'am, Park's voice carried a note of professional bewilderment that Sarah had rarely heard from fighter pilots. They're not producing heat signatures consistent with any known propulsion system. Our infrared sensors are picking up minimal thermal emissions. Sarah felt her breath catch. Advanced stealth technology was one thing. The U.S. had been developing and refining it for decades. But aircraft that could maneuver at high altitude without conventional propulsion signatures suggested technology beyond anything in the known aerospace inventory. Viper 1-1. Maintain safe separation and continue observation. Do not, repeat, do not engage unless directly threatened. We may be dealing with experimental technology. Copy, Phoenix. But ma'am, there's something else. The unknowns just changed formation and they're descending directly toward Colorado Springs Municipal. Same vector as your commercial traffic. Captain Morrison and First Officer Price exchanged glances. The implications immediately clear. If unknown aircraft were descending toward the same airport, where Flight 847 was attempting to land. The situation had just escalated from air defense exercise to potential direct confrontation. "An OR-80 operations, Phoenix," Sarah transmitted. "Request immediate clearance for American 847 to divert to alternate airport. We need to clear the area. Negative, Phoenix. All regional airports are under military closure. Weather conditions at alternate sites exceed landing minimums. You're going to have to ride this one out in the hold." Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see other aircraft navigation lights scattered across the sky. Multiple commercial flights caught in the same situation, suspended between Earth and storm while military aircraft maneuvered around them. Somewhere above, Major Park and her F-22s were closing with unknown contacts that defied conventional understanding of flight dynamics. The radio squawked again with Park's voice, now carrying unmistakable tension. "Phoenix, NORAD operations. The unknowns just did something I've never seen. They executed simultaneous vertical climbs from 37,000 to 55,000 feet in approximately 12 seconds. No aircraft I know of has that kind of climb rate." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Vertical climb rates of that magnitude suggested thrust to weight ratios far exceeding anything in the current military inventory. Even the most advanced experimental aircraft she'd test flown at, Edwards couldn't achieve such performance without compromising other flight characteristics. "Viper 1-1, are you getting any electromagnetic emissions from the unknowns?" Radio. "Transmissions, radar, electronic warfare systems." "Negative on radio transmissions, Phoenix. But our electronic warfare officers are reporting something unusual. The unknowns appear to be scanning us with some kind of focused energy beam. Different frequency spectrum than anything we've encountered." Captain Morrison caught Sarah's eye, his expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. They were no longer dealing with a routine intercept of lost civilian aircraft, or even a foreign military probe. The flight characteristics and electronic signatures suggested technology that didn't match any known aerospace development program. "NORAD operations, Phoenix," Sarah transmitted. "Recommend we establish communication protocols with the unknowns. If they're scanning our aircraft, they're demonstrating some level of sophisticated sensor capability. They may be attempting to communicate through non-standard methods." "Phoenix, this is General Harrison at NORAD Operations Center." Sarah recognized the voice immediately. General Patricia Harrison, Commander of Aerospace Defense Operations, and her former colleague from Joint Training Exercises. "Sarah, we've got a situation here that's beyond normal operational parameters. These unknowns appeared on our sensors without any prior radar track, demonstrated impossible flight characteristics, and now they're approaching civilian airspace. What's your assessment?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, drawing on 34 years of aviation experience. From her first solo flight in an F-16 to her final test mission at Edwards Air Force Base, she'd encountered experimental aircraft, foreign military technology, and electronic warfare systems that pushed the boundaries of known science. But what Major Park was describing fell outside the envelope of conventional aerospace engineering. General Harrison, Phoenix. "Based on the flight characteristics reported by Viper 1-1, we may be dealing with technology that represents a significant advancement over current aerospace capabilities. The combination of high-altitude performance, rapid climb rates, minimal thermal signatures, and sophisticated sensor systems suggests either breakthrough propulsion technology or..." She paused, knowing her next words would sound impossible. "To military officers trained in conventional warfare, or technology of non-terrestrial origin." The radio fell silent for several seconds, an eternity in military communications where every moment carried tactical significance. When General Harrison's voice returned, it carried the weight of someone making decisions that could affect national security. "Phoenix, Are you suggesting we may be dealing with unidentified aerial phenomena? General, I'm suggesting that we approach this situation with appropriate caution and open minds. The flight characteristics reported by our interceptors don't match any known aircraft in the inventory of hostile nations. If this is advanced foreign technology, we need to gather intelligence. If it's something else entirely, we need to avoid escalation that could have unforeseeable consequences. Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see lightning illuminating the upper atmosphere where the confrontation was unfolding. Somewhere in those storm clouds, American fighter pilots were facing the unknown with courage that had defined military aviation for generations. But courage alone might not be sufficient for a situation that transcended conventional understanding of flight and physics. Viper 1-1 Phoenix, she transmitted. Major Park, I want you to try something. Reduce your intercept speed and approach the unknowns from their 6 o'clock position, but maintain non-threatening posture. If they're monitoring our communications and scanning our aircraft, they may interpret aggressive maneuvering as hostile. Intent, copy Phoenix. Reducing speed and adjusting intercept angle. But ma'am, these unknowns just ... they just stopped. Stopped? Affirmative Phoenix. All 3 aircraft have come to a complete halt at Angels 42. They're maintaining perfect formation while stationary relative to the ground. No aircraft I know of can hover at that altitude without rotor systems. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the warm cockpit temperature. Hovering flight at 42,000 feet required either helicopter-style rotor systems or vertical thrust capabilities far beyond conventional jet engines. The unknowns were demonstrating flight characteristics that challenged fundamental assumptions about aerodynamics and propulsion. An ORAD operations, Phoenix. Recommend we initiate standard first contact protocols. If these unknowns are monitoring our communications, they may be attempting to demonstrate non-hostile intentions by halting their approach. Phoenix, General Harrison. First contact protocols were developed for theoretical scenarios. We've never actually implemented them. General, with respect, we've never encountered a situation like this before. The unknowns have demonstrated advanced capability, but haven't taken any overtly hostile actions. They've maintained formation, responded to our interceptors by altering their flight path, and now they've stopped their approach. This suggests intelligence and possibly peaceful intent. The radio crackled with multiple voices as NORAD operations. Center coordinated with Pentagon Command Authority, Air Force Space Command, and civilian aviation authorities. Sarah could hear the controlled urgency of military professionals, facing a situation outside all established protocols and procedures. Viper 1-1 Phoenix, she transmitted. Major Park, I want you to try direct radio contact with the unknowns. Use International Emergency Frequency 121.5, Standard Greeting Protocols. Copy Phoenix. Switching to guard frequency. Sarah could hear Park's transmission through the cross-connected radio systems. Unknown aircraft. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force F-22. Call sign Viper 1-1. You are operating in restricted United States airspace. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. For 30 seconds, only static filled the frequency. Then, cutting through the electromagnetic noise with crystal clarity, came a voice. That would change everything Sarah thought she knew about aviation, about Earth's place in the universe, and about humanity's readiness for contact with intelligence from beyond the stars. Viper 1-1, this is Celestial Research Vessel Harmony. We acknowledge your authority in this airspace and apologize for the intrusion. We have been monitoring your aircraft designated Phoenix and request permission to establish communication with the individual bearing that call sign. The cockpit of Flight 847 fell absolutely silent. Captain Morrison stared at the radio, his mouth slightly open. First Officer Price had stopped breathing entirely. Through the radio, Sarah could hear similar silence from NORAD Operations Center and the F-22 flight military professionals, stunned by the impossible reality of first contact with intelligence from beyond Earth. Sarah keyed the microphone with hands that had steadied in countless crisis situations, but now trembled slightly with the magnitude of what she was experiencing. Celestial Research Vessel Harmony, this is Phoenix. How do you know my call sign? And what is your purpose in Earth airspace? The response came immediately, the voice carrying undertones that suggested intelligence both vast and benevolent. Phoenix, we have been monitoring your species' aerospace development for several decades. Your call sign appears in our records as belonging to an individual who has consistently demonstrated the highest standards of aviation safety, courage under pressure, and protection of others. We specifically requested to communicate with you because our databases indicate you are among the most qualified humans to serve as initial contact for our peaceful scientific mission. Sarah felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. First contact between humanity and extraterrestrial intelligence, happening not in a government facility or research laboratory, but in the cockpit of a commercial aircraft at 8,000 feet above the Colorado mountains, with her as the designated representative of the human race. Harmony, Phoenix. What is the nature of your scientific mission? Phoenix, we are conducting atmospheric and geological surveys of your planet as part of a broader study of worlds capable of supporting complex life. Your species was not expected to have achieved aerospace capability at this level during our survey window. We had intended to conduct our research without detection, but your advanced radar systems and rapid military response required us to establish contact to avoid misunderstanding. Through the radio, Sarah could hear General Harrison's voice cutting through the static. Phoenix, NORAD Operations. We're recording everything. Continue communication and assess their intentions. Sarah found herself in the unique position of serving as Earth spokesperson for First Contact, responsible for representing not just American military interests, but the hopes and fears of all humanity. The young woman who had first climbed into an F-16 cockpit 40 years ago had never imagined that her aviation career would lead to this moment. Harmony, Phoenix. Our military personnel are understandably concerned about unidentified aircraft in our airspace. Can you provide assurances regarding your peaceful intentions? Phoenix, we understand your species' defensive responses and respect your territorial authority. We have no hostile intentions toward your world or your people. Our research mission is purely scientific, focused on understanding planetary conditions and atmospheric composition. We had hoped to complete our surveys without interfering with your aircraft operations. Major Park's voice cut through the radio. Phoenix, the unknowns, Harmony, they're moving again. Ascending slowly and maintaining formation. No threatening maneuvers. Sarah realized she was participating in the most significant moment in human history, serving as the bridge between Earth's military defenses and intelligence from another world. Every word she spoke could influence the future relationship between humanity and whatever civilization had sent the research vessel Harmony to study their planet. Harmony, Phoenix. Would you be willing to establish formal diplomatic contact with representatives of our government? We have protocols for peaceful interaction with visiting ... researchers. The pause that followed lasted exactly 15 seconds. Sarah found herself counting, a habit from military communications where timing carried tactical significance. When Harmony responded, the voice carried what might have been amusement, though it was difficult to interpret emotional content from beings whose psychology remained completely unknown. Phoenix, we would be honored to establish formal communication with your governmental representatives. However, our protocols require initial contact to be conducted through individuals who have demonstrated exceptional qualifications in aerospace operations and crisis management. According to our analysis of your species' aviation records, You are uniquely qualified to serve as primary liaison for establishing peaceful relations. Sarah felt every eye in the cockpit focused on her, the weight of representing Earth and humanity's first diplomatic contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Through the radio, she could hear similar stunned silence from NORAD Operations Center, F-22 pilots, and undoubtedly monitoring stations around the world where this conversation was being recorded for historical analysis. She keyed the microphone. One more time, choosing words that would define humanity's first formal response to contact from beyond the stars. Harmony Phoenix. On behalf of the people of Earth, we welcome peaceful contact and scientific cooperation. We request that you coordinate your research activities with our aerospace authorities to ensure safe operations for all aircraft in our shared airspace. Acknowledged, Phoenix. We are transmitting detailed flight plans and research protocols to your NORAD Operations Center. We also extend an invitation for you to visit our research vessel, should you be willing to serve as humanity's first representative aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft. The implications of that invitation hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Sarah Chen, callsign Phoenix, who had dedicated her life to pushing the boundaries of human flight, was being invited to cross the ultimate frontier, from passenger in seat 14A to Earth's first ambassador to the stars. The silence that followed. Harmony's invitation stretched across radio frequencies from Colorado Springs to Washington, D.C. From NORAD's Mountain Fortress to Pentagon command centers, where generals and admirals were grappling with the reality that human civilization had just received its first formal invitation to diplomatic contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 40 years of aviation experience converging on this single decision. Every flight she'd ever made, from her first solo in an F-16 to her final test mission at Edwards, had been preparing her for this moment when she would represent not just the U.S. Air Force or American interests, but the entire human species. In its first step toward joining a larger galactic community, General Harrison Phoenix, she transmitted, I need to speak with the highest level of command authority available. This decision affects more than military protocol. It represents humanity's first diplomatic contact with another intelligent species. Phoenix, General Harrison. We have a secure connection to the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense Martinez is on the line, along with the President's National Security Advisor. They're authorizing you to make whatever decision you feel is appropriate. Your call sign and service record have given you de facto authority to serve as Earth's representative. Sarah felt her pulse steady, the way it had during countless high-stress situations when clear thinking and decisive action were required. She opened her eyes to find Captain Morrison and First Officer Price watching her with expressions of awe and concern. Two professional aviators who understood they were witnessing history being made in their cockpit. Harmony Phoenix, she transmitted. I accept your invitation to visit your research vessel on behalf of humanity and in the interest of peaceful scientific cooperation. However, I request that representatives of our military and scientific community be included. Any formal diplomatic protocols. Acknowledged, Phoenix. We are prepared to accommodate additional representatives from your species. Our research vessel can safely transport up to 12 human individuals for initial diplomatic contact. We recommend including aerospace specialists, scientists, and diplomatic personnel. Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see the storm beginning to clear, revealing stars that suddenly held infinite new possibilities. Somewhere above those stars, intelligence had been watching humanity's progress, waiting for the right moment to establish contact. The fact that they had specifically requested her suggested that her reputation had somehow traveled beyond Earth's atmosphere, a thought that was both humbling and terrifying. NORAD Operations Phoenix, she transmitted. I recommend we establish a formal contact protocol. Major Park's F-22 flight should maintain escort position, but in a ceremonial rather than defensive posture. We need to demonstrate that humanity can respond to peaceful contact with dignity and appropriate caution. Copy, Phoenix. Viper 1-1, adjust your formation to ceremonial escort. The Unknown's correction, Harmony research vessel, has been granted diplomatic status by Pentagon authority. Major Park's voice carried barely controlled excitement. Phoenix, this is incredible. I joined the Air Force to push the boundaries of flight, but I never imagined we'd be escorting humanity's first contact with another world. It's an honor to be part of this moment. Sarah smiled, remembering her own sense of wonder during her first supersonic flight, her first combat mission, her first test of experimental aircraft. Major Park was experiencing something infinitely more significant, the moment when human aviation expanded beyond Earth's atmosphere to encompass the infinite possibilities of galactic flight. Harmony, Phoenix, how do you propose we conduct this transfer? Our aircraft is a commercial airliner with 73 souls on board, operating in severe weather conditions. Phoenix, we can establish a safe transfer using our atmospheric transport systems. Your commercial aircraft will be guided to a secure landing at Colorado Springs Municipal Airport, where our diplomatic shuttle will meet you. The shuttle is designed to operate safely in your atmospheric conditions and can accommodate the selected human representatives. Captain Morrison leaned toward the radio. Harmony, this is Captain Morrison, pilot in command of American Airlines. Flight 847. What are your requirements for airport operations? We need to coordinate with ground control and emergency services. Captain Morrison, we are transmitting detailed technical specifications to your air traffic control systems. Our shuttle requires a standard runway for initial approach, but can transition to vertical flight for precise positioning. We recommend clearing civilian aircraft and personnel from the immediate area as a safety precaution. Sarah could hear the controlled chaos of multiple radio frequencies as NORAD operations coordinated with civilian aviation authorities, military commands, and international monitoring stations. Word of first contact was spreading through government channels faster than any security protocol could contain it. Within hours, the entire world would know that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Phoenix, General Harrison. We're establishing a joint task force for first contact protocols. You'll be accompanied by Dr. James Chen from NASA's Astrobiology Institute, Colonel Maria Santos from Air Force Space Command, and Ambassador Catherine Williams from the State Department. They're being flown to Colorado Springs by military transport. Sarah noted the irony that Dr. James Chen shared her surname, probably no relation, but appropriate that the Chen family name would be represented at humanity's first diplomatic contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. She thought about her parents, who had immigrated to America with dreams of their daughter achieving success in aerospace engineering. They could never have imagined that success would include representing Earth in galactic diplomacy. Roger, General Harrison. I'll coordinate with the team upon arrival at Colorado Springs. Harmony, can you provide an estimated timeline for the diplomatic shuttle arrival? Phoenix, our shuttle will arrive at Colorado Springs Municipal Airport approximately 30 minutes after your aircraft lands. We recommend using this time to prepare your representative team and coordinate with local authorities. Our diplomatic protocols are designed to minimize disruption to your normal aircraft operations. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel through the radio. Sarah could hear Major Park reporting visual contact with the research vessel Harmony. Phoenix, NORAD operations. I have eyes on the primary unknown, Harmony research vessel. It's beautiful. Approximately 200 meters in length. Elegant curved surfaces that seem to shift color as it moves through the storm clouds. No visible propulsion systems, but it's maintaining perfect position relative to our formation. Sarah felt goosebumps rise on her arms as she realized she was about to see technology that represented perhaps centuries of advancement beyond human capability. The research vessel Harmony was not just a spacecraft. It was proof that intelligence in the universe had achieved mastery over physics and engineering that humanity was only beginning to understand. American Airlines 847, Colorado Springs Tower, you're cleared for approach runway 28. Emergency vehicles are standing by, and the airport has been cleared of civilian traffic. Welcome to history, Phoenix. Captain Morrison began the approach checklist with hands that trembled slightly from excitement rather than fear. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and moved back through the cabin, aware that every passenger was staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. Marcus, the young aerospace engineer, looked up from his laptop where he'd been taking notes during the entire radio exchange. Dr. Chen, Phoenix, I can't believe this is happening. First contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, and you're going to be humanity's first ambassador. Walter Thompson adjusted his VFW cap and stood as Sarah passed his row. With military precision, he came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. Ma'am, it's been an honor to fly with Phoenix. You represent the best of human aviation, and now you'll represent the best of humanity itself. Sarah returned the salute, feeling the weight of military tradition and civilian hope combining in a moment that transcended all previous boundaries. She was no longer just a retired Air Force colonel or an aerospace consultant. She was carrying the dreams and fears of every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. The aircraft touched down at Colorado Springs Municipal Airport with barely a bump. Captain Morrison's skill evident in the smooth landing despite challenging weather conditions. Through the windows, Sarah could see emergency vehicles lining the runway, their red and blue lights creating a corridor of human technology, welcoming visitors from the stars. But it was what she saw in the distance that took her breath away. Rising from the far end of the airport, illuminated by its own gentle luminescence, was a craft that seemed to embody every dream of flight that humanity had ever conceived. Harmony's diplomatic shuttle was approximately 50 feet in length, its surfaces flowing in curves that suggested both advanced aerodynamics and artistic beauty. It hovered 20 feet above the ground with no visible means of support, waiting with the patience of intelligence that had mastered time as well as space. As Flight 847 rolled to a stop at the terminal gate, Sarah saw Major Park's F-22 formation, executing a ceremonial flyover, 4 of Earth's most advanced fighters saluting. Humanity's first step toward joining a galactic community. The sight was both magnificent and humbling, a reminder of how far human aviation had come and how much farther it could go with new knowledge and cooperation. Phoenix, Harmony's voice came through the aircraft's radio one final time before she disembarked. We are honored by your acceptance of our invitation. This moment represents the beginning of a new era for your species, one of cooperation, scientific advancement, and peaceful exploration of the universe. Sarah keyed the microphone for what she knew would be the last transmission from Seat 14A. Harmony, Phoenix. On behalf of humanity, we look forward to learning from your wisdom and sharing our own perspectives on the joy and challenge of flight. Thank you for choosing peace over power, communication over confrontation. As she stood to leave the aircraft, Sarah felt the eyes of every passenger upon her, 73 souls who would forever remember the night they shared a commercial flight with Earth's first ambassador to the stars. Marcus was frantically typing notes on his laptop. Walter Thompson had tears in his eyes, and Janet Rodriguez stood at attention with military bearing that honored both her brother's memory and humanity's bright future. Ma'am, Captain Morrison said as Sarah reached the cockpit door. It's been the honor of my career to have Phoenix aboard for first contact. Fly safe out there among the stars. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar pre-flight excitement that had never diminished through 4 decades of aviation. "Captain, I have a feeling the flying is just beginning." As she walked down the jetway toward a future none of them could have imagined when Flight 847 took off from Denver, Sarah Chen, callsign Phoenix, carried with her the hopes of every human being who had ever dreamed of flight, of exploration, of rising from the challenges of Earth to touch the infinite possibilities of the universe. The storm had passed. The stars were shining. And humanity was about to learn that the sky had never been the limit. It had always been just the beginning. 3 years later, the lecture hall at the Colorado Springs Institute for Aerospace Diplomacy was packed with students from around the world, their faces reflecting the diverse tapestry of humanity, united by a common fascination with flight and the infinite possibilities of space exploration. Dr. Sarah Chen, now bearing the official title of Director of Human Celestial Relations, stood at the podium where she had delivered this same lecture hundreds of times. Yet each telling felt as fresh and significant as that first radio transmission from Flight 847. "The thing you have to understand about first contact," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through history rather than simply studied it, "is that it wasn't really about technology or diplomacy or even scientific advancement. It was about recognizing that the universe is filled with intelligence that shares our curiosity, our drive to explore, and our fundamental desire to understand our place among the stars." In the front row, Marcus Williams, now Dr. Marcus Williams, leading researcher in human celestial propulsion systems, raised his hand. 3 years had transformed the young aerospace engineer from Flight 847 into one of Earth's foremost experts on the anti-gravity systems that had revolutionized human transportation. His grandfather's old 4 Phantom manuals now shared shelf space with technical specifications that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. "Dr. Chen, can you tell us about the moment when you first stepped aboard Harmony's diplomatic shuttle?" Sarah smiled, remembering the sensation of crossing from familiar aluminum and steel into a craft that seemed to be constructed from materials that responded to thought as much as physical force. The shuttle's interior had been warm, welcoming, filled with a gentle luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "The first thing I noticed was that their technology didn't feel alien at all," she replied. "It felt like the logical next step in aviation evolution, what human aircraft might become when we fully understand the relationship between consciousness and physical reality." The celestial researchers had mastered what we're only beginning to explore: the integration of biological intelligence with mechanical systems. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing a photograph that still took her breath away even after 3 years of regular viewing. It was an image of Earth taken from the research vessel Harmony, showing the blue marble of humanity's home suspended against the infinite backdrop of space. But unlike previous photographs of Earth from space, this image had been taken with sensors that revealed the planet's electromagnetic signature, the combined thoughts, dreams, and aspirations of 8 billion human beings, creating a soft golden aurora around the world. "What the celestial researchers taught us," Sarah continued, "is that consciousness itself is a form of navigation system. Every thought, every dream, every aspiration contributes to the collective intelligence that guides a species toward its destiny among the stars." They had been monitoring not just our technological development, but our spiritual and intellectual growth as well. A student from the back of the lecture hall raised her hand. Lieutenant Ana Restrepo, one of the new generation of pilots, training in human celestial hybrid aircraft that could operate in both atmospheric and space environments. "Mom, what was it like to pilot their technology for the first time?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful as she remembered that extraordinary moment, 6 months after first contact, when she had been invited to take the controls of a celestial training craft. The experience had redefined everything she thought she knew about flight, about the relationship between pilot and aircraft, about the very nature of navigation through three-dimensional space. "Imagine," she said, "that instead of manipulating controls to direct an aircraft, you simply thought about where you wanted to go and the craft responded to your intention. No stick and rudder coordination, no thrust management, no complex calculations of aerodynamics and physics. You visualized your destination and the craft became an extension of your consciousness, carrying you there with the precision of thought itself." She paused, looking out at the faces of students who represented humanity's first generation of interstellar pilots, young men and women, who would grow up taking for granted the ability to travel between worlds, to explore star systems that had been unreachable just a few years earlier. But the most important lesson from first contact wasn't about technology, Sarah continued. It was about understanding that intelligence in the universe is fundamentally cooperative. The celestial researchers had been monitoring dozens of species across this region of the galaxy, waiting for each to develop the wisdom and maturity necessary for peaceful contact. Some species never achieve that level of development. They destroy themselves through conflict or environmental devastation before they can join the galactic community. Marcus raised his hand again. What made them decide that humanity was ready? Sarah clicked to the next slide, a compilation of news footage from around the world showing humanity's response to first contact. Instead of panic or aggression, the dominant reaction had been curiosity, wonder, and an eagerness to learn. Religious leaders had spoken of divine revelation, scientists had embraced new possibilities for research, and ordinary citizens had looked up at the stars with hope, rather than fear. They had been monitoring our response to crises for decades, she explained. Every time humanity faced disaster, natural catastrophes, pandemics, technological challenges, they observed how we chose cooperation over competition, how we shared resources and knowledge to solve problems together. The fact that first contact occurred during a storm, with civilian and military aircraft sharing the same airspace without conflict, demonstrated the kind of collaborative instinct they were looking for. 5 years later, the memorial service for Walter Thompson was held at Arlington National Cemetery on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were turning colors that reminded Sarah of the aurora she'd seen surrounding Earth from Harmony's observation deck. Walter had lived to see humanity's first interstellar colony established on Kepler 442b, had witnessed the launch of Earth's first diplomatic mission to the Centauri system, and had spent his final years as a consultant to the Veterans Administration's new program for counseling former military personnel, adapting to the psychological challenges of galactic citizenship. Sarah stood among hundreds of mourners, veterans, from every conflict of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, young pilots training for interstellar service, and a delegation from the celestial research community who had specifically requested to honor Walter's contribution to peaceful human-celestial relations. His VFW cap rested on the casket, now accompanied by a new medal, the Order of Galactic Service, recognizing his role in humanity's transition from planetary to interstellar civilization. Walter Thompson represented the best of the generation that prepared humanity for the stars, Sarah said in her eulogy. He understood that military service wasn't about conquest or domination, but about protecting the conditions necessary for growth, exploration, and peaceful cooperation. When first contact occurred on Flight 847, Walter's immediate response was not fear of the unknown, but respect for intelligence that had achieved what humanity was striving toward. After the service, Sarah walked among the white headstones that marked the resting places of American service members from centuries of conflict. Many of the newer graves bore an additional inscription: served Earth, protected humanity, enabled the stars. These were veterans who had lived to see their sacrifice vindicated, not by military victory, but by humanity's acceptance into a galactic community based on peace, scientific advancement, and mutual cooperation, her phone buzzed with a message. From Major Lisa Park, now Colonel Park, commanding officer of Earth's first interstellar fighter squadron. The F-22s had been upgraded with celestial propulsion systems, transforming them from atmospheric aircraft into spacecraft capable of defending Earth's interests across multiple star systems. Phoenix, the message read, we've just received approval for the Proxima Centauri patrol mission. Thought you'd want to know that humanity's first interstellar combat air patrol will be led by an F-22 with Phoenix painted on the nose. Some traditions are too important to leave behind. Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar surge of pride that came with knowing the call sign would continue to inspire new generations of pilots, exploring the infinite frontier of space. Phoenix, the symbol of rising from ashes of renewal and rebirth, had become more than a personal identifier. It had become humanity's call sign as a species reborn through contact with the stars. 10 years later, the ceremony at Edwards Air Force Base was attended by representatives from 17 different worlds, their various spacecraft arranged on the same runway where Sarah had conducted her final test flights as an active Air Force pilot. The occasion was the dedication of the Phoenix Center for Interstellar Aviation, a training facility where the next generation of human pilots would learn to operate spacecraft capable of traveling between star systems. Sarah, now 72 years old, but still possessing the sharp reflexes and keen intelligence that had defined her aviation career, stood before a mixed audience of humans and celestials, young pilots and veteran astronauts, government officials and ordinary citizens, who had traveled from around the world to witness the ceremony. When I first received the call sign Phoenix 43 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the desert where so many aviation milestones had been achieved. My squadron commander told me it represented the ability to rise from the ashes of any situation. I thought he was talking about aircraft malfunctions and emergency procedures. I never imagined he was actually predicting humanity's rebirth as an interstellar species. She paused, looking up at the clear desert sky where the contrails of conventional aircraft mixed with the energy signatures of celestial spacecraft in a pattern that represented the successful integration of human and extraterrestrial technology. The sight still filled her with wonder, even after a decade of regular interstellar travel. The Phoenix Center represents more than just a training facility, she continued. It represents humanity's commitment to carrying forward the values that made first contact possible: curiosity over fear, cooperation over competition, exploration over exploitation. Every pilot who graduates from this program will carry those values to the stars, serving as ambassadors for the best of human civilization. In the audience, she could see Marcus Williams with his wife and children, all wearing flight suits bearing the insignia of the Interstellar Aviation Corps. His 3-year-old daughter, Maria, was playing with a toy spacecraft that used real anti-gravity technology. The kind of advanced physics that had once been theoretical concepts were now children's toys. She could see Janet Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, commanding officer of the Sol System Defense Fleet, responsible for protecting Earth and its growing network of interstellar colonies. Her brother Diego's memory lived on in the next generation of test pilots who pushed the boundaries of human celestial hybrid technology. And in the front row, she could see the faces of her current students, young pilots from every continent of Earth and several off-world colonies, united by their shared dream of exploring the infinite possibilities of galactic civilization. The most important lesson I can leave with you, Sarah concluded, is that being Phoenix isn't about individual achievement or personal glory. It's about serving something larger than yourself, about rising to meet challenges that seem impossible, about carrying forward the flame of human curiosity and courage to places we've never imagined. As she spoke the final words of her address, 16 F-22 Raptors equipped with interstellar propulsion systems executed a precision flyover, their formations spelling out Phoenix in contrails against the desert sky. The tribute was visible from orbit, where the International Space Station had been expanded into humanity's first interstellar shipyard, and from the surface of Mars, where human colonists paused in their terraforming work to watch the ceremony. Via holographic transmission, 15 years later, the retirement ceremony for Dr. Sarah Chen took place not on Earth, but aboard the flagship of humanity's first deep space exploration fleet, the USS Phoenix, a magnificent vessel that combined human engineering with celestial technology to create something entirely new in galactic civilization. The ship was named not just for Sarah's call sign, but for the symbol she had come to represent: humanity's ability to transform challenges into opportunities, disasters into triumphs, endings into new beginnings. Sarah stood on the observation deck, looking out at a view that would have been impossible to imagine during her first flight in an F-16, 6 decades earlier. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the rings of Saturn providing a backdrop for the ceremony, while spacecraft from dozens of worlds formed an honor guard stretching across millions of miles of space. Earth was visible as a blue star in the distance, home to 8 billion humans who now took interstellar travel for granted. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored celestial observers, Admiral Marcus Williams announced to the assembled crowd. The young aerospace engineer from Flight 847 had risen through the ranks to become commander of humanity's interstellar fleet, his career trajectory as remarkable as the technological advances that had made it possible. We gather today to honor Dr. Sarah Chen, callsign Phoenix, whose courage during first contact transformed humanity from a planetary species into citizens of the galaxy. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nervousness as she approached the podium, the same sensation she'd experienced before her first solo flight, her first combat mission, her first test of experimental aircraft. Even after decades of public speaking, addressing crowds still activated the same reflexes that had once prepared her for high-risk aviation. When I was a young pilot, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ship's communication systems to audiences across the solar system and beyond. I thought the ultimate frontier was the edge of space, breaking the sound barrier, flying at the limits of atmospheric flight, pushing aircraft to their absolute performance boundaries. I never imagined that the real frontier was inside us, the boundary between fear and curiosity, between isolation and cooperation, between the known and the infinite possibilities of the unknown. She paused, looking out at the faces of humans and celestials who had worked together to transform humanity's understanding of flight, of technology, of its place in the universe. The integration had been so successful that many of the younger humans in the audience had celestial mentors, while celestial researchers had adopted human concepts of individualism and creative risk-taking that had enhanced their own scientific capabilities. The call sign Phoenix was given to me because of my ability to survive aircraft malfunctions and emergency situations. Sarah continued, but I've come to understand that the real meaning of Phoenix isn't about individual survival, it's about species renewal. Every time humanity faced extinction, we found ways to rise from the ashes stronger and more capable than before. The Black Death led to the Renaissance. World wars led to international cooperation. Environmental crisis led to sustainable technology. And the isolation of being alone in the universe led to our transformation into galactic citizens. In the audience, she could see familiar faces that had been part of her journey. Admiral Janet Rodriguez, now commanding the Sol System Defense Academy, training the next generation of interstellar pilots. Dr. Marcus Williams' children, all serving in various capacities throughout human space. And scattered throughout the crowd, former students who had gone on to explore star systems whose names had once existed only in astronomical catalogs. The most important lesson from my career, Sarah said, is that flight, whether in an F-16 or a spacecraft capable of faster-than-light travel, is ultimately about transcending limitations. Not just the limitations of gravity and atmosphere, but the limitations of imagination, of possibility, of what we believe we can achieve when we work together toward common goals. She gestured toward the windows where Saturn's rings created a natural amphitheater for the ceremony. Every human child born today will grow up knowing that they can travel to any world in the galaxy, that they can work alongside intelligence from other star systems, that they can contribute to discoveries and achievements that will benefit countless species across countless worlds. That transformation, from a species bound to one planet to citizens of an infinite universe, began with first contact on Flight 847, but it was completed by millions of individuals who chose cooperation over conflict, curiosity over fear. Admiral Williams stepped forward with a presentation case containing Sarah's final commendation, the Galactic Medal of Honor, an award created jointly by human and celestial governments to recognize individuals whose actions had advanced the cause of peaceful interstellar civilization. It was the first time the medal had been awarded to a human, a recognition of Sarah's unique role in facilitating humanity's transition to galactic citizenship. Dr. Sarah Chen, Williams announced, by order of the United Earth Government and the Celestial Research Consortium, you are hereby awarded the Galactic Medal of Honor for extraordinary service in advancing peaceful relations between species, for pioneering the integration of human and celestial aviation technology, and for demonstrating the highest ideals of exploration, cooperation, and service to others. As Sarah accepted the medal, a crystalline structure that seemed to contain captured starlight, she felt the weight of a lifetime dedicated to flight, to pushing boundaries, to serving something larger than herself. The medal was beautiful, but the real reward had been the journey itself. From that first day at pilot training when she'd been told that women didn't belong in fighter cockpits, to this moment when she was being honored as a pioneer of interstellar civilization. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying across light years to audiences who would remember this moment as the end of one era and the beginning of another. "It has been the honor of my life to serve as Phoenix, to rise from every challenge stronger and more determined to explore the infinite possibilities of flight." As the ceremony concluded, Sarah walked to her quarters aboard the U.S. Phoenix, quarters that would be her home for the next phase of her journey. At 87 years old, she was beginning a new assignment as humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, a consortium of intelligent species from across the Milky Way galaxy who had been monitoring humanity's progress with interest and approval. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was embarking on her greatest adventure at an age when most people would be considering retirement. But longevity treatments developed through human celestial cooperation had extended healthy human lifespans to well over a century, and Sarah's pilot reflexes and sharp intelligence remained undiminished by age. 20 years later, the final entry in Dr. Sarah Chen's personal log was recorded from her office aboard Galactic Station Alpha, humanity's diplomatic headquarters at the edge of the Milky Way galaxy. Through her window, she could see the swirling arms of the galaxy where human colonies now thrived on hundreds of worlds, where human pilots flew spacecraft powered by technology that transcended the old limitations of reaction mass and energy consumption. Personal log, Dr. Sarah Chen, stardate 2087.365, she began, her voice still strong despite her 97 years. Today marks the 40th anniversary of first contact on Flight 847. 40 years since I was just a passenger in Seat 14A, returning from a consulting job, never imagining that I was about to become humanity's first ambassador to the stars. She paused, looking at the holographic display that showed the current disposition of human civilization across the galaxy. 347 colonies, ranging from small research outposts to thriving worlds with populations in the millions. The Sol system had become the hub of a vast network of trade, scientific cooperation, and cultural exchange that included over 200 different intelligent species. The question I'm asked most frequently by young pilots, Sarah continued, is whether I ever imagined that first contact would lead to such rapid expansion of human civilization. The honest answer is that none of us could have predicted the pace of change. Celestial technology didn't just give us faster spacecraft. It gave us new ways of thinking about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. She gestured toward a wall display showing photographs from her career, her first F-16 squadron, the cockpit of Flight 847 during the storm over Colorado, the diplomatic shuttle that had carried her to humanity's first meeting with extraterrestrial intelligence, and hundreds of images from the years that followed as she had helped guide humanity's integration into galactic civilization. What I've learned over 4 decades of interstellar service, she said, is that the universe is filled with intelligence that shares our fundamental drive to explore, to learn, to push beyond the boundaries of the known. The Celestials weren't unique in their scientific curiosity or their desire for peaceful cooperation. They were representative of how intelligence evolves when it survives long enough to master the challenges that destroy lesser species. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission from Earth. Sarah accepted the call to find herself looking at the face of Captain Elena Chen Martinez, her great-niece who was preparing to take command of humanity's first expedition beyond the Milky Way galaxy. The young woman had Sarah's eyes, her determination, and her passion for pushing the boundaries of human achievement. "Aunt Sarah," Elena said, using the family connection that transcended their official military relationship. "We've just received final approval for the Andromeda mission. I wanted to let you know that our flagship has been designated UES Phoenix 2 in honor of the call sign that made all of this possible." Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar surge of pride mixed with concern that came with watching the next generation prepare for challenges that would test the limits of their courage and skill. The journey to the Andromeda galaxy would take 5 years, even with the most advanced faster-than-light technology, carrying human explorers farther from Earth than any previous mission. "Elena," she replied, "remember that being Phoenix isn't about the aircraft you fly or the technology you command. It's about rising to meet challenges that seem impossible, about carrying forward the values that define the best of human civilization, about serving something larger than yourself." "Understood. Ma'am, we won't let you down." After the transmission ended, Sarah returned to her log entry, knowing that this would be one of her final official records as humanity's senior ambassador to the galactic community. "The real legacy of first contact," she concluded, "isn't the technology or the colonies or the expansion of human civilization across the galaxy. It's the proof that intelligence in the universe is fundamentally cooperative, that species can transcend their primitive instincts for conflict and competition, that consciousness itself is the ultimate navigation system for exploring the infinite possibilities of existence." She paused, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed distant and unreachable, but rather like neighborhoods waiting to be explored by curious minds and brave hearts. "To future generations who will carry the Phoenix call sign to galaxies we haven't yet imagined, remember that every flight begins with a single step into the unknown. Every exploration starts with the courage to leave the familiar behind, and every great achievement in aviation, whether atmospheric or interstellar, requires the willingness to rise from challenges stronger and more determined than before." Sarah ended the recording and walked to her window, watching as a formation of human spacecraft departed for destinations across the galaxy, some carrying colonists to new worlds, others conducting scientific research, still others serving as diplomatic missions to species humanity was encountering for the first time. At 97, she had lived to see humanity transform from a species bound to a single world to citizens of the universe itself. She had served as Phoenix for over 6 decades, rising from every challenge to demonstrate that the human capacity for growth, exploration, and cooperation knew no boundaries. The stars were calling to new generations of pilots and explorers. And Phoenix, the eternal symbol of renewal and rebirth, would continue to inspire them as they carried human civilization to heights that no one in Seat 14A of Flight 847 could ever have imagined. As Sarah prepared for sleep in her quarters aboard Galactic Station Alpha, she could hear the distant hum of spacecraft engines, the sound of humanity's children departing for adventures among the stars. It was a lullaby that spoke of infinite possibilities, of dreams made real, of a species that had learned to rise from every challenge and soar toward the infinite frontier of tomorrow. Phoenix was eternal, and humanity's greatest flights were yet to come.